are from 5 Innovative and welcome to the Chapter 10 of Dear Mr Kilmer. Before we start, let us introduce ourselves first to you. Here we go!
Hi guys, my name is Rajni, daughter of Manimaran from Chapter 10, the last chapter of Dear Mr Kilmer. I'll be acting as Anne Schraff and the narrator.
Hi, I'm Anne Schraff. I'll be acting as Commander and also the narrator.
Hi everyone, I am Pritisha Peramalu from Chapter 10. I'll be acting as Mrs. Sharma, Mr. Garrison and narrator.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Patricia. I'm from Chapter 10. I'll be the medic and also the narrator.
Hi, my name is Muhammad Ishaq Chabuddin from Chapter 10 and I will be acting as Richard, the main character of Dear Mr. Kilmer. So, stay tuned guys.
Hello everyone, my name is Darwin Selvaratnam and I'll be acting as Mr. Shomer and Pa and also the narrator. Hope you guys enjoy.
And last but not the least, my name is Fatinur Aisha and I'm the group leader for this chapter. I'll be acting as the German sniper and also the narrator.
Converse, convince, comprehend. Converse is to inform. In this video, we're going to show you how Mr. Kilmer had been died in the war, how Richard exposed himself to the people out there about his poem, and also how did Pa dealing with Richard. So for Convince, you guys don't have to be worried because we are using pictures and videos which are related to this chapter, just to ensure that you guys are on track about the story. So for Comprehend, we're going to acknowledge you who is the real Pa, and also we're going to show you how important it is to understand people, to deal with people actually. I think that's all from me. Enjoy!
Richard was too stunned to say anything. He did not even cry. How could Mr. Kilmer be dead? Richard had just received a letter from him that morning. With a great compassion, the Shermers drew Richard into the house. Hannah and her parents understood better than anybody in Turtle Lake how much George Kilmer had meant to him. Mr. Shermer gently handed Richard a copy of a newspaper from Sioux City. The large headline glared at Richard, "Beloved American Poet Killed in Battle." Right in the middle of the page, with a handsome rectangular border around it, was printed Mr. Kilmer's famous poem Trees. Next to the poem was a photograph of Mr. Kilmer in his sergeant's uniform. He had thick swept-back hair, alert eyes, a fine moustache, and a strong, decisive chin. Richard detected just the hint of a smile on his lips, a warm, kind smile.
I have been friends with Mr. Kilmer for more than a year. How strange it was to see his face only after he was dead.
At first, Richard did not think he could bring himself to read the article telling how Mr. Kilmer had died. But he had to know. He had to at least try to understand.
The article said it had happened in the early dawn of July 30. The Allied guns from the Ain River to Chateau Thierry all roared at once. After months of brutal trench warfare, the Yanks were finally on the attack of force. The Germans replied with showers of rockets and flashes.
Forward to guns.
Ragged, tired, but dutiful Sergeant Kilmer was one of the men moving with his regiment. His job was to scout German machine gun nests. German snipers were hiding in the tall grass all around. Many of Kilmer's comrades had already been mowed down by enemy fire like grain before a thresher. Sergeant Kilmer crossed the crest of a small hill.
I see war at Head Young.
The bullet was struck into the head of Sergeant Kilmer. Instantly, he sank to the already blood-soaked earth of the battlefield. While dodging the sniper's fire, his buddies carried his body away to a safe place behind the ridge. A medic looked at him briefly.
There is nothing we could do to save him.
Sergeant Kilmer's comrades all knew of his most famous poem, so they wanted to bury him under a tree. But they could not find a whole tree standing anywhere in that war-shattered landscape. They settled on a tree stump at the edge of the burned bridge near the Oak River in France.
As Richard finished reading the article, the reality of Mr. Kilmer's death started to sink in. Even so, Richard was surprised to feel no grief. In fact, he seemed to feel nothing at all. Richard became aware of something in his hip pocket.
It is a letter I had written to send to Mr. Kilmer just now. Thank you, Sherman, for letting me know. I need to go back now. Goodbye.
Richard fled their house and ran through the streets of Turtle Lake and along the road leading out of town. He did not stop running till he reached his favorite oak tree overlooking the train tracks. He limped to the highest branches he could possibly reach. Richard cried and clutched the unsent ladder to his chest. An awful sense of futility swept over him.
Oh, what do poets and poetry do to make the world better? How could I ever learn the answer now? Perhaps there was no answer. Mr. Kilmer had been killed, and neither his nor Richard's poetry had been able to stop that. I will never write another poem. Never!
Richard climbed down from the tree, walked the rest of the way home, and went up to his room. He took up pencil and paper and wrote down. In memory of Sergeant Joyce Kilmer. A precious little world has died, a world of lovely rhyme and song, never ever to be sung. I must be brave, I must be strong. A precious little world has died, for what is every human soul, if not a world all by itself? Let teardrops roll, let sad bells toll. A million little world has died, so fighting everywhere will be ceased. Or so I'm told, but think it's strange. A million worlds for one world's peace. A precious little world has died. Let children cry, let widows sigh. How could you die, my little world, until you simply told me why?
I wish I can share it with somebody, but there was no point in showing it to Pa or even to Angie. They had never understood my friendship with Mr. Kilmer, much less my desire to write poetry. The Shermans! Of course they will understand. I will share it with them.
The next day, Richard went to Sherma's house. Sitting with Hannah and her parents in their little parlor, Richard read his poem to them. Hannah cried quietly. Mr. Sherman shed a small tear. His wife walked over to him and put her arm around him comfortingly.
Richard, what are you going to do with this poem?
I used to send my best poems to Mr. Kilmer. Maybe I could share it to Mrs. Hansen.
That won't do. That is not enough.
I don't understand.
There are many boys from Turtle Lake fighting in this war. Some have died already. The town is full of mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers who feel just the same way like you do. They need to read your poem. Your words mean a great deal to the people of this town, coming from one of their own.
But how can I share with people?
The Turtle Lake Weekly might print it.
Then everybody could see it.
Isn't that the idea?
Richard knew he could never explain how scared he was at the idea of having his poem in print. And the Shermans firmly insist that Richard take his poem over to the newspaper office right that very minute. It just might make next week's issue.
Hannah walked with Richard to the newspaper office.
Can I help you?
He's written a poem about Mr. Kilmer. Give it to him, Richard.
Hesitantly, Richard handed Mr. Garrison his poem. As Mr. Garrison started to read the poem, Richard fled the office. Hannah followed him out.
Maybe he won't print it.
Don't you want him to?
Hannah, you don't understand. If my poem wins up in print, my pa will see it for sure.
Maybe he will like it.
You don't know my pa. I'm enough of an embarrassment to him already. If the whole team sees a poem of mine in the paper, it will make him just plain crazy.
During the next few days, father and son went about their farm work in their usual stern silence. Richard said nothing about his poem. He just kept hoping that Mr. Garrison would not print it. The paper always came out early Tuesday morning. Richard walked into town at dawn so he could be at the newspaper office when it appeared. The very minute the first bundle of papers hit the sidewalk, he bought a copy. Richard looked anxiously at the front page. He did not see his poem anywhere. Instead, he saw that Mr. Garrison had written a nice obituary. His eyes widened. The last line read, "For a tribute by a local poet." Turn to page 38.
Oh no! There it was square in the middle, in memory of Sergeant George Kilmer by Richard Knight.
Richard's heart sank. He knew that Pa would see the poem when the paper was delivered to his house later in the day. Richard walked wearily home and joined his father in the farm work. Several times during the day, he was on the verge of telling his father about the poem. That way, it would not come as a complete shock, but Richard could not bring himself to say anything. After they finished the last chores, Pa stopped at the mailbox and picked up the day's mail. Among a handful of bills was the newspaper. Pa scanned the front page as he and Richard walked towards the house.
Richie, it says here your poet friend was killed. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did.
Richard did not want to be around when his father saw his poem. Without another word, he strode ahead of his father into the house. The screen door slammed close behind him, and he walked up the stairs to his bedroom. He went inside, sat down on the edge of the bed, and waited for the inevitable. Before long, Pa appeared in the bedroom doorway, holding the newspaper in his hand. Richard could see that it was open to page 3.
Can I have a word with you, Rich?
Richard nodded. Pa came into the room and sat on the edge of Gus' bed, facing Richard. Richard was surprised that Pa did not seem angry. He was actually calm, even tranquil.
I guess I've never told you much about my brother Roland.
No, you never have, Pa.
Well, he was a lot like a brother Gus. Had some idea that he had lived forever. Like nothing would ever get the best of him. Don't get me wrong, he was a fine man. He would have made a terrific farmer. I don't think a day goes by when I don't imagine him working this land alongside you and me. How you'd love him, Richie, and how proud of his nephew he would be.
Richard's heart leaped up in his throat. He wanted to thank Pa for saying such a beautiful thing, but he could just not speak.
But then came 98 and the war with Spain. I was too young to enlist, not that I'd have done it anyway. The whole thing seemed stupid to me. Just an excuse for Uncle Sam to grab up a lot of land that didn't belong to him. But Roland was all heated up about doing his patriotic duty. So, he signed up and went. It was not like the war that's going on now. It was just a short little war. Probably no more than 3 or 4 boys from Turtle Lake signed up. They all joined the Navy except for Roland. He was the only one to fight on land in Cuba. And he was the only one died. He was killed in the Battle of El Caney on July 1. It was a great American victory. I'll never forget what one of the big city papers wrote about the battle. American casualties were slight.
Pa gasped out a deep sigh of pain and sadness.
My brother was not a slight casualty.
Suddenly, Richard's father began to sob. Richard was shaken. He had never seen his father cry before. He rose from his bed and sat down beside Pa, putting his arm around his shoulders.
As I watched them lower his coffin in his grave, I kept whispering to myself, "A world is gone. A world is dead and gone."
Then, Pa held out the newspaper page with Richard's poem on it.
How did you know, Richie? How did you know those words?
Richard did not say anything. There was nothing else to say. At last, Pa understood why Richard wrote poems. What was more important? Now Richard understood why he wrote them too. The war came to an end in mid-November. The Allies were victorious. The day the news reached Turtle Lake, Richard picked up a copy of the Sioux City newspaper on his way home from school. He showed it to Angie and Pa. The 3 of them passed the newspaper around the living room, poring over the story about the end of history's most terrible war.
What's so funny, bro?
I'm just thinking about poor Gus, still training and working his tail off, getting ready for a war that's over and done. He's still got a lot of time left to serve in the army, and he's going to hate every minute of it.
Richard and Angie started laughing too, partly at the joke fate had played on Gus, but mostly from joy. The danger to Gus was over, and so was the danger to Otto. He came home to a parade and a hero's welcome, just like all the other brave soldiers from Turtle Lake. Richard knew that anti-German feelings would linger for a while in the little town, but they would not last forever, not without a war to keep them alive.
As winter approached, Richard divided his days between school and farm work. He also spent as much time as he could with Hannah and the Shermers. And of course, he kept writing poetry. Richard's poetry became a regular feature in the Turtle Lake Weekly, but because his poetry usually dealt with farm life, Richard never submitted a poem without first sharing it with his father. It became almost a nightly ritual. After dinner, Richard and Pa would sit beside the fire and Richard would read his latest poem aloud. With his keen understanding of farming and the land, Pa often had a correction or suggestion to make. Richard found his father's ideas as helpful as Mr. Kilmer's had been. Other times, Pa would simply enjoy the poem without comment or criticism.
That's good, son. That's really good.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood. Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best. Yeah, hey, every day can be a better day despite the challenge. All you gotta do is leave it better than you found it. It's gonna get difficult to stand, but hold your balance. I just say whatever, cause there is no way you're around Everyone falls down sometime, but you just gotta know it'll all be fine. It's okay.